Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and in this video we're going to look at the File Manager. Now if you've been following my courses, we have already learned user defaults and core data, and those are great places for saving and persisting data, but there's actually another place that we can save data on iOS devices, and that's of course the File Manager. Now this File Manager works exactly like the File Manager on your computer, on your Mac. When you go to save a document, you usually open up a folder where you want to save it and then you click Save. And the File Manager on the iPhone works the exact same way. We first find a folder where we want to save our documents, and then we can save it, and of course we can get it when we need it. Now the big difference here, of course, is that we are not actively double-clicking and opening folders on our Mac. Instead, we need to programmatically tell the code exactly where to save a file, exactly where to fetch and find a file. This becomes especially handy in iOS development when we're trying to save file types that are actually not accepted in core data. So for example, we can't save an image directly to core data, but we can save it directly to the File Manager. So this File Manager is a great place to put images, videos, audio files. We can store JSON data. We can store pretty much any document we want in this File Manager. And as I'll explain in this video, although it's great, we should use this sparingly because this is saving data to the user's device. So we don't want to just start saving everything in the world to this device. And another thing we need to take into account is that because we're saving on someone else's device, we of course as the developer can't actually open up their device and see all the folders and all the files that they have saved. Instead, we need to be proactive and make sure we are monitoring and tracking everywhere that we are saving our data on their device. Because if we need to delete data or change data, it's on us to know exactly where it is saved. So in this video, we're going to take an image, we're going to save it in the File Manager, we're going to then fetch it from the File Manager, and then most importantly, we're going to learn how to manage and delete from the File Manager, because as the developer, it becomes your job to manage all of the data for your application that is on the user's phone. And if you're still confused at the end of this video, do not worry, because we're going to start using the File Manager a bunch in the next couple of videos, and also in the next playlist when we build a full app and actually use this to save some documents. All right, I am back in our Xcode project, of course. Let's right click on the navigator, create a new file, and of course it will be a SwiftUI view. Let's call this File Manager Bootcamp. Click Create. Once you're inside, click Resume on the canvas. I'm going to leave the navigator open real quick because we are going to use it. And again, File Manager is not technically a SwiftUI component, but it is used in SwiftUI apps and it's used in all iOS apps, so obviously very important to go over. And we're going to start off by bringing an image into our project. So I actually have an image on my desktop right here called Steve-Jobs, and you can use any image that you have on your computer. Basically just take an image and drag it into the assets.xc assets folder. So again, that's this assets folder over here on the left in the navigator, and just drag an image inside. And if you're confused on this, I did a video in the SwiftUI Bootcamp on how to add images to your project, and all you have to do is drag and drop images right here. And just to point out that we can put images into this assets folder, obviously, like we just did, but this should be used fairly sparingly because when you put images here, they are actually embedded into your app binary. So when you go to ship your app to the App Store, the data for these images is included in your app's file size. So if you have a ton of images here, it will make your app file size very big, and you could even get rejected from the App Store if your binary is too big. So when you put images here, it should basically be for images that are always going to be needed in your app, and probably smaller images such as icons and logos that are core to your app. But if it's something that you might want to download from the internet, like a user profile or an Instagram post, that should be downloaded and not embedded right here. All right, and once you have this image here, just take a note of exactly what the image title is. So mine is Steve-Jobs, because we're going to need to type that out in a second. So let's jump back into the File Manager Bootcamp view. I'm going to close the navigator, and let's create a very simple screen. I'm going to add a navigation view, open the brackets. I'm going to add an image. I'm going to open the parentheses and use the name here. and this will be Steve-Jobs. It should be the exact name of your image. Let's make it resizable. Let's make it scaled to fill. Let's give it a frame with a width of 200, a height of 200, and we don't need the alignment. And then maybe let's call clipped and corner radius of 10. Let's click resume, see what it looks like. All right, I have my image on the screen. Let's finish up this view here I'm going to hold the command button and click on the image, and I'm going to embed it in a VStack. You could also just type out the VStack here. I'm going to put a spacer at the bottom so that the image is pushed to the top. And on the VStack, let's add a .navigation title, and let's just say FileManager. All right, I'm going to take this image and actually put it into a view model. So let's create a view model. We're going to create a class. I'll call it FileManager View Model, and it will conform to observable object. So open the brackets. Let's initialize one in our view. So we'll use an @stateObject var VM, and we'll set it equal to a FileManager View Model. Open, close the parentheses. And inside this FileManager View Model, we are actually going to have an @published var. We'll call it image, and it will be of type UI image, and we'll make it optional, and we'll set it equal to nil to start. On this image in our view, let's actually reference this image here. And I'm using a UI image because I find that when we are moving images around like different classes and different structs, it is just easier to use a UI image. And if you try to pass in an actual UI component that is of type image, it'll be much harder to work with. So I definitely recommend using UI images in the background when you're dealing with the data. And the nice thing is that this image actually has a initializer that takes a UI image. So let's use this UI image initializer. And of course we want to reference this one, which is optional. So let's start by saying if let image equals vm.image, open the brackets. So if we do have an image here, then we'll add it onto our screen. We'll paste this inside and we'll put our image here. Again, I did a whole video on if-let statements in the SwiftUI Bootcamp. If you're confused, go check that out and then come on back. If I click resume, we should not see the image anymore because it's set to nil right now. And we're going to create an init in this view model. And when we initialize this view model, we're going to call a function that's called func. Get image from assets folder, open close parentheses, open the brackets. Let's call it from the init. And all we're going to do in this function real quick is set image equal to UI image, open the parentheses. We'll use the named completion, and of course it will be Steve-Jobs. I'm going to use this string a bunch, so let's actually make it a variable. Let's say let image name of type string, and we'll set it equal to Steve-Jobs. I'll pass in this image name down here. And if I click resume, we should see our image back on the screen now. So that's working. And so again, the reason we have this image right now is because we embedded it into the assets.xcassets folder, right? We put it right here directly. But when you're actually using your app, most of the images in your app, user profiles, Instagram posts, those are going to have to be downloaded from the internet. You're not going to have them directly. So when you download them from the internet, if you want to save them to your device, you can save them in the FileManager. So what we're going to do is take this image that we already have and just save it to the FileManager. So although we're not downloading images in this video, the part where we're actually saving to the FileManager will be the exact same. So let's create a button underneath this image here. We'll create a button, open the parentheses. Let's use the action and label. I will leave the action blank for a second, and the label will say save to, I'll call it FM for FileManager. Let's give it a foreground color of white. Let's give it a background color of color.blue. Let's give it some padding before the background, and I'm going to add some extra padding horizontal. After, let's give it a corner radius of 10, and let's change the font to be headline. All right, very simple button we have here. And when we click this button, obviously we want to save it to the file manager. All right, so what we're gonna do is scroll on up here, and outside of the view model, I'm gonna create another class. We're gonna call this class local file manager. And I'll open the brackets here. And the reason I'm separating this is because in your apps, the view model should be specific to specific views. So this view model is for this view that we see here. Whereas this file manager is going to be generic for anything that wants to access the file manager. So if I have maybe 3 different screens in my app, and all 3 of those screens are saving to the file manager, I'll actually have 3 views, 1 for each screen. I'll have 3 view models, 1 for each screen, but I'll only have 1 file manager class here. And this will be the same file manager class that I use for all of the screens. So that's why we're separating the view model from the manager here. And because this is generic, I'm comfortable making it a singleton. So let's call static let instance equals local file manager. Let's create a func called save image. And into this function, we're going to have to pass in an image, of course, which will be of type UI image. And we'll need a name that we want to save it as. So we'll add name of type string. We'll go ahead and open the brackets. And when you save images to the file manager, you can't actually save a UI image. Instead, we save the data for the image. So what we're going to do is call image.jpg data. And then here we can change the compression quality. If we want to compress it to a lower quality than it currently is, I could put this as maybe 0.5 for 50% of the current quality. But I'm going to leave it as 1.0 to just be 100% of the current quality. Now I'm using JPEG data because my image I know is .jpg. But if you had a .png image, you would probably want to use the image.png data. All right. So getting rid of that. So let's actually say let data equals image.jpg data. And if I hold the option button and click on this data, we see that it's optional. And that's just saying that there's a chance that we can't get the data from this image. Now we know this is a valid image and this will succeed, but let's just be safe coders and wrap this in a guard let statement. So let's add a guard here. We'll say guard let data equals this, else, open the brackets, and we will return. And in this else, we'll just print out error getting data. This obviously shouldn't happen, but we're just being safe coders. And all we need to do to save it is called data.write. And we don't need the options right now. You can play with that on your own time, but we're just going to write to a URL. And let's click enter here, and we now need a URL, which is basically where do we want to save this data. And this is where we need to find a place in the file manager that we want to save this image. So let's comment this out quick and let's create the URL. Let's say here let directory equals file manager dot default dot URLs for. And we're going to look for the one here with the for and in. And I will make this full screen quickly because we actually don't need the canvas for this part. And when we call this, we can then add a search path directory here. And if we press the period here, we can see that there are a whole bunch of different directories we can choose from. You can think of these directories kind of just as folders, and it's where do we want to save all of this data. And every user's iPhone is going to have all these directories: the library directory, the movies directory, the music. These are the same directories that you see on your Mac. Like if you went into the Finder and you looked at the root folders, it would look the exact same here. We have the downloads directory, but I actually went and Googled it for you guys, and I came to this website here, which I will post in the caption below. And this is coming directly from Apple. Of course, it's on the Apple developer website. And this is talking about storing data on a user's iOS device into the iCloud. And I guess that's if they have the iCloud backing up their device, which I assume most people do. But anyway, if we scroll down here, we can see pretty straightforward from Apple. And number one here says that only documents and other data that is user generated or cannot otherwise be recreated by your application should be stored in the documents directory. So this will be stuff that is very core to your app, but again, cannot be recreated by your app. So maybe if someone was signing in and they went through some specific onboarding process that created a document and it was a one-time thing, then it would be a good place to store that in the documents directory. But if it was something like a profile picture that they could download again and again and again, obviously that can be recreated, so we shouldn't put that in the documents directory. But the documents directory is fairly common, so to use that, all we have to do is type in documents directory. And if we click this in, basically I use the user domain mask every time. And I believe this is basically relating to if you have multiple users on a machine. So if I click on this local domain mask, it will say install items to everyone on this machine. That would be access to my account on my computer as well as any other accounts on my computer. But for like an iPhone app, the only thing that's really relevant is the current user. So the user domain mask is probably a good bet to put for this. And that's all we need to get into the documents directory. But before we move forward, let's look at a couple other directories that are important. So let's say let directory2 equals FileManager.default.urls. And let's jump back to this website. And number 2 is data that can be downloaded again or regenerated should be stored in the library/catches directory. So examples of files should be downloadable content such as used by magazines, newspapers, map applications. So basically anything that a user can download, downloadable content should be put into this catches directory. And we can do that by calling here .catches directory. This is not rocket science. We'll call that user domain mask, and that's how we access the catches. We're going to do one more. Let's say let directory3 equals FileManager.default.urls. Let's jump back in here, and number 3 is very simply data that is used only temporarily. So the least important here should be stored in the temp folder. And we can go back into the code, and this one's actually a little different. Sorry, I didn't mean to type out these URLs here. And to access the temp directory, we just call .temporary directory. And just like that, these are definitely the 3 most common directories and possibly the only directories I've ever used in the file manager. So these 3 should cover most scenarios that you guys are going to have. And before we move forward, I'm going to just print out each of these. We'll call directory, and let's just print all 3 here, 2 and 3. And I want to print all 3 of these out, and I want to call this save image from our code. So we need to reference this instance and then this save image. So going down to our file manager here, let's create a let manager equals the local file manager.instance. That's our singleton. And then let's create a function here. We'll say func save image, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And in this save image, we want to call the manager and then call the save image function inside the manager. So we'll say manager.saveImage. We need to pass in an image. So this is our image, which is optional. So let's first unwrap it to make sure there is an image. We'll say guard let image equals image else return. We'll pass in this new image to this. And the name, of course, will be our image name, which we have up here. Let's then call the save image from our button. So down on our button, we'll say vm.saveImage. All right, I'm going to take this File Manager Bootcamp view. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to open up the navigator and go into our app.swift file. This is where your app main call is, where your app starts. I'm going to make the first screen in our app this File Manager Bootcamp. I'm going to click on the iPhone 12 here, and let's run our app on a simulator. And we're running on the simulator because I want to get those printouts that we just went through. I'm going to close this quick. Alright, and when my screen loads, I can see the image and I have this saved to FM, and when we click this, it should run this save image function and we should get these 3 printouts. So looking down here, we'd ignore some of this SwiftUI print here. This is all just garbage, honestly. And hopefully when I click this button, we get our 3 printouts. And let's take a quick look at them. It looks kind of like gibberish, but these are URL paths. And they work just like the folders on your computer. So when you go to save something on your computer, you open up maybe the library folder, and then inside that there's a developer folder, and then you save. This is the same thing. So each of these backslashes represents a folder, and then eventually in here is going to be your device. This is probably our device ID, and then after that is the documents folder. So the documents directory opens up this documents folder, and then we can save our image inside here. The catches directory opens up the library and then the catches folder, and the temporary directory opens up this temp folder. So not too much going on here. I know this looks kind of like gibberish, but I just wanted to point out that we are saving things in different locations. And these paths are important because anytime we want to access the document at this path, whether we want to save it or delete it or update it or fetch it, we need to use the exact path. So it's very important that we are monitoring what paths we're using. And obviously inside this documents folder, we want to add an extension specifically for this image. So for our purposes, we're going to use the catches directory for the rest of this tutorial. So I'm going to actually delete these print statements, and let's comment out the first one and the third one. Let's just call this directory. And the last thing I do need to point out is that this call right here, it actually returns us an array. So if we look at this printout here, it is an array, and there's only one item in the array. So although it's an array, we only want to use the first item here. We want to use this data in here. We don't actually want the array. So we're just going to call .first at the end of it. This is just going to give us that first item, which is this whole path here. And then we're going to add our extension for this image. We're going to say let path equals directory dot appending path component. And the path component is going to be a string. And we're going to use the name that we passed into this save image. So let's use the / open close parentheses. We'll pass in the name, and just like it is on my desktop, it is stevejobs.jpg. I'm going to save it as .jpg here. And real quick, I'm actually going to just print out the directory here, and let's print out the path. I'm going to run the simulator one more time just so we can see explicitly where we are saving this image. Let's click our button, and we can see here that the directory is the library / catches, and then we're going to actually save this image as stevejobs.jpg, and that is within the catches folder. And as you can see, this is optional, so we want to unwrap it to make sure we actually do get a URL here. Alright, so I'm going to delete this write to and this print statement here. And we're going to add a guard statement. We're going to say guard. Let's say let path equals. I'm going to basically redo all of this. So let's say FileManager. I'm just going to put each segment on a different line. So let's say .default .urls for the catches directory .user domain mask .first, and that is optional. And then we'll say .appending path component. And here I will just copy and paste this string, paste it in here, and I'll say else. And then we can just print out error getting path, and of course return. So this is kind of just like a simpler way to write this directory and this path here. So I'm going to actually just delete this section up here. So we have our path, and now we can just call data.write to, and we have our path, which is a URL. And this call can throw, so we need to put it in a do catch statement, and we'll say catch let error, open the brackets. We'll put our calls in here, so we'll say try to write the data. And if it's successful, let's just print out here success saving. And if it's an error, let's print out here error saving. And then let's backslash open close parentheses and print out the error. Again, I've covered these guard statements and these do statements a bunch of times in my courses, so I'm assuming that you already understand all of that. And let's run the simulator one more time and see if we get this success saving printout. Click save to FM and success saving. All right, so we are successfully saving this to the file manager. And that's step one. And step two now, of course, is getting it back from the file manager. So let's create another function down here. We'll say func, we'll say get image, we'll open close parentheses and open the brackets. And when we go to get an image, we're going to need the either identifier or the name of that image. So let's pass in the name of type string. And when we go to get the image, we need the exact path where it is saved. So this path that we created when we save the image, we need to get the exact same path when we go to get the image. So because we're reusing the same logic here, this path, I'm going to make this its own function. So down here we'll say func get path for image. We'll add a parameter called name of type string, and this will return a URL, and we'll make it optional, and we'll open the brackets. We're making it optional in case for some reason we can't get the path. So I'm going to cut this guard statement that we have up here with the file manager catches directory. I'm going to paste it in here. And if we get this error getting path, we're going to return nil. So that's when we can't get the URL. But if we can, we get past this guard statement, we're going to return the path. All right, and then back up in our code, we no longer have this path reference. So let's actually create another one in this guard let statement. We're going to say guard let data equals this, comma, let path equals, we're going to call our new function get path for image. The name, of course, will be the name that we're passing in here. Let's just put this else back up here. So now we again have a reference to our path, and this should go away. The error should go away. Let's clean this up. Now our save image function is condensed. Our get path for image is reusable. And when we go to get an image, we can then use this again. So we'll say guard let path equals get path for image, and we'll pass in the name. And the second thing I like to do is after we get this path, I want to make sure a file actually exists at this path. So as a handy trick, we can call FileManager.default.exists, file exists at path. And here we need the string version of this path. So when we call get image for path, it actually returns a URL. And on that, we can call .path, and this path returns us a string here. So now we can just take this path and pass it in here. And of course, we'll say else, open the brackets. We'll print out error getting path, and we will return. So if we can get this path and file exists, then we can continue down here, and we can get our image. And of course, we're going to want our function to return a UI image. And of course, there's a chance here if we get this error, we don't actually get an image. So we'll make it optional in that scenario. And in that scenario, we will return nil. But if we are successful, we will return a UI image, open the parentheses, and there's actually a completion here. That's contents of file. And we can actually pass in a path, which is our path. All right, we now have our function to get an image from the file manager. So scrolling down into our view model here, we have a function to get the image from the assets folder. Let's create a func get image from FileManager. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And here we're going to set image equals to the manager dot. Then we're going to look for our new function get image, and of course we can pass in our image name. Alright, so before we use this, I'm going to run the app one more time, and you guys should as well. What I'm going to do is basically, right now we're getting this image from the assets folder, right? So this is coming from the assets folder where we started the video, and when I click save to FileManager, it has saved to the FileManager on the device. It's a folder that is in the device. It's not in our app code, but it's actually in the device here, so it's on this simulator. And now if I comment this line out, and instead I call get image from FileManager, if I run this app again, it should get that image, and it's getting it from the FileManager this time. So this time this image is coming from the device, not from the assets folder. And I can prove that because if we open up the navigator and we go to the assets.exe assets folder, and I delete this image from our project completely. So our project has nothing in the assets folder. And I rerun the app, we can see that we still have access to the image. And that's because this image was saved to the device, not in our app. And this is great for persisting images in your app. If you download some really important content, you can save it to the FileManager and it will save and persist. And again, this doesn't have to be for images. It can be pretty much any kind of document you want to save, but it is very common to use with images, videos, maybe sometimes some JSON data or even audio files. So this is coming from the FileManager, not from the assets folder. I'm going to put my image back in the assets folder just for some testing again in a second, but I just wanted to prove that to you guys. So let's jump back into the code now. We now have the ability to get the image from the FileManager, but I'm just going to put in the get image from assets folder for now. So we learned how to save images to the FileManager, and we learned how to get images from the FileManager. And the next thing we need to cover is how to delete images on the FileManager. And we're doing that because it's often overlooked, but when you save things to the FileManager, they're saving to that person's device forever. You should assume that if you save it to the manager, it's going to be there until you explicitly delete it. So if you're saving hundreds of images, they're all getting saved, and you don't want to take up too much space on that user's device. So it's very important to monitor and delete old items from the FileManager. We're going to do that now. Let's go back up to our FileManager class here. Save image, get image, and under here, let's create a func delete image. Again, we're going to need the name of type string. We'll open the brackets. And we're going to take this guard statement from the get image, and we're going to copy it and just paste it in our delete image. And we're not returning anything right now, and if it exists, we're going to create a do catch statement. And we're going to try to call FileManager, FileManager.default.remove item at. And this remove item at needs a URL, so we will pass in our path. And we had converted this path to a string up here, but let's actually keep it as a URL. And then for this file exists, we're going to need to convert it to a .path down here. All right, in the catch statement, we'll say let error, and then we will print error deleting image, and then backslash open close parentheses and pass in the error. If we get to here, let's just print out successfully deleted. All right, pretty simple function. Let's call this from our code. So going down, I'm going to create a func here, func delete image, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And we're going to call manager.delete image, and of course we can pass in our image name. We need to call this from our view, so going down, I'm going to create a hstack. I'm going to cut this button here, paste it into the hstack, and paste another one below it. And the second button, I'm just going to call vm.deleteimage, and we're going to say delete from fm. Let's make the background color.red. Let's run this app one more time. See if we are successfully deleting. All right, if I delete from FM, we have successfully deleted, so we know it is working. And you'll notice here that if I click delete from FM again, it's going to say error getting path, and that's because in our code we added some safe checks so that when we go to delete it, we are checking that the file exists. And since we had already deleted it, it no longer exists. So of course we're practicing safe code and we're printing out error getting path here. All right, so this is the basics of FileManager. Basically, we can save data to files so that it persists. Let's take this a couple steps further before we wrap up. I want to put some data onto the screen here so we can see if it's actually saving or deleting. Because in your app, you probably want to give some user feedback, like if it actually saved or if it actually deleted. So going down to the FileManager view model, I'm going to create a @published var. Let's call this info message of type string, and we'll set it equal to a blank string. Let's take that info message and let's just put underneath this hstack, I'm going to add a text with the vm.info message. And let's just give it a .font of large title. Let's give it a .font weight of semi-bold and maybe a foreground color of purple. Why not? All right, so now back up in our code, and when I call this save image, I want it to actually tell me if this save image was successful. So I'm going to go to this function here, the manager.saveImage, which is back up here. And let's actually just have this return a string. And so if we fail this path here, let's return error getting data. If we come here and we are successful, let's return success saving. If we get this error, let's return the error saving. I'm going to do the same thing for the delete image. Let's return a string. If we get here, let's return error getting path. If we're successful, we'll return successfully deleted, and then finally, if there's an error, we will return error deleting image. Going back down, we get that return string when we call this. So we'll just set info message equal to the result of that. And here we'll set info message equal to the result of that. If I run the app one more time, and interesting enough here, I actually don't have the image pulling through. And that's because in my init, I have get image from FileManager. And about a minute ago, we deleted the image from the FileManager. So obviously it is totally gone now. So I'm going to change my init back to get it from the assets folder. Let's not get it from the FileManager real quick. So we'll get it from the assets folder, and now we can save to FM, and we get this success saving, and of course we can delete it. If I try to delete it after it's already deleted, we should get an error message. Let's try to save it again. And if I try to save it while it's saved, it will still say success saving. And that's because you can overwrite documents on top of documents. Just like if you clicked save as and you saved something on top of something else, it would just overwrite it. So that's what we did here. We just overwrote it by clicking save again. So this is working perfectly. And the last thing I want to introduce you guys to is creating your own folders. Because as I mentioned before, you are in charge of what you save to this file manager. So if you're saving a ton of stuff to the file manager, you want to make sure that you have all the references and you know exactly where all of that data is so that you can access it or delete it later. Because if I saved images to some random path and then I have no idea what that path is, I'm not going to know how to either get that image. I'm not going to know how to delete that image. I need this exact path. But what is handy sometimes is creating a folder specific to your app or specific to this part of your app where you can save everything inside. So this way, if you ever get lost, you could just access that folder directly. So what I'm going to actually do is create another function here. We're going to say func create folder if needed. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And we're going to create an init. So every time I create this local file manager, which is only once because it's right here in our singleton, when this is created, I'm going to call create folder if needed. And in this function, we're just going to create a folder specific to our app. So if I was creating an app here, I would obviously use this catches directory, but within the catches directory, I would create another folder specific to my app that I might call like my app underscore profile pictures or my app underscore content. So this way, if I ever needed to, I could just delete that folder within the catches directory. So going back up to create folder if needed, we're going to say guard let path equals file manager dot default dot URLs for the catches directory is what we're using for the user domain mask dot first, and that's optional. And here we're going to add the folders, and we'll say dot appending path component. And then here I'm going to add the name of my folder. So I'm going to call my folder my app underscore images. You can call it whatever you want. Obviously you need to track what the name of your folder is. But basically anytime I save an image from my app, I'll put it into this folder. And I might create several folders inside a single app. But by making these folders, it just makes it easier to manage where all my documents are saved. So on this, we'll then call .path, and we'll say else. And here we can just return if we can't get this path. Finally, we want to check that this path, this folder, doesn't already exist, because we're creating the folder if needed, but if it's already existing, we don't need it. So we'll say if FileManager default exists, file exists at path, and of course we can pass in the path. And we want to check if it doesn't exist, so we'll use the exclamation point. So if it does not exist, open the brackets. If it doesn't exist, we then want to create this folder. And we do that with a do catch statement, and we say FileManager dot create directory. And we're creating a directory because it's a folder and not a file. Of course, we're going to use the at path. The path will be the path. And this is almost always true. It basically means if we had like a folder inside a folder, so if we appended a path component and then we appended another one and then another one, and to get to that third one, we needed to create 2 or 3 folders. This would then create all those folders. And then for the attributes, this is optional, so I'm just going to put it as nil. And of course, if there's an error, we'll say let error, and we will print here error creating folder. And I'll print out the error. And here I'll also print out success creating folder. Alright, so when we run our app now, this init should be called and this folder should be created on the first time that we run it. So we should get this success creating folder. And the only thing we need to change now is the path for our image. If I jump to the path for our image that we made earlier, we actually now need to first go into the new folder and then add this, and then add our custom path component. So here I'm going to add a .appending path component, and the folder is going to be the exact same name that we just had. So this will be the folder name. I'm actually going to make it a constant up here. Let's say let folder name equals, and I'll set it equal to this. And then I will just make this the folder name. And down in our get path, I will also set this as the folder name. So now when we save our image, when we're getting our image, it should be within that folder. And just to see that quickly, when we go to save it, where are we? At the save image, right before this return, let's just print the path that we're saving to. All right, let's run the app quick. As soon as it loads, I should get a printout. It looks like it happened way at the top here, success creating folder. So as soon as it loaded, it created this new folder, which printed out here. It created this new directory for us. So when we save it, success saving, and I should get a printout of where it's saved to. So here I get my printout, and it's the catches folder that we saw, and then it's a folder that we just created, my app underscore images, and then my images within this folder. So this is a little bit better. This is a little more practical for your apps, so that we're not just saving things everywhere. We're saving them structured, so that if we ever get lost or anything, we can always just delete this folder entirely because we know all of the stuff that we've saved is within this folder. And last but not least, let's just learn how to delete a folder. So in here, let's create a func delete folder. Open close parentheses, open the brackets. And I'm going to actually just copy the same path for creating the folder. I'm going to paste it in our delete folder here. So we have a path just to the folder name, not to a specific image. And in here, we can just very simply call a do catch statement, and we can call FileManager .default.remove item at. And I just realized here that we can actually use the string version or the URL version. So sorry, I didn't bring that up when we deleted an image. I guess when I deleted an image, oh yeah, we did this funky path.path thing here. We could actually have just kept this as the path. This wouldn't have to be this way, and then we could have just done remove item at path, and then we can pass it in. It doesn't really matter if you're using the URL or the string, it's the same stuff. And up here we will call .remove item at path, and we'll pass in our path. Here I'll just print success deleting folder. We'll say let error print error deleting folder, then we'll print out the error. Now let's just call this delete folder from our code quick. So going back down, when we delete the image, let's also call manager.delete folder just to see if it works. Let's click play. And you'll notice that when I ran it this time, we didn't get that printout at the top for creating a folder, and that's because the folder already exists. We created it last time we ran our app. And that's why we called that function create folder if needed, because if it already exists, we don't run this code twice. So being good coders here, it exists, we can save to the folder, and if I delete, we should now also have our delete success deleting folder. So that's all it takes to delete the entire folder, and if I rerun the app now, it should have to create the folder again because it was deleted. So success creating folder. Alright guys, I know this was a little confusing, but essentially all we're doing is working with the file manager to save items, to fetch items, and then to delete items if we need to. The important things to note here is that the file manager works just like the Finder on your computer. You first find a directory, you find the folders where you want to save it, and then you save it with a name. So in our case, we went to the catches directory, we saved it in a folder called myapp_images, and then we saved it with a name was custom to the actual name of the image that we were trying to save. So we went into the folder and then we added our custom name. And now you guys know how to save images, delete images, and get images, of course. So if you had an app where you had maybe an image that comes up very often in your app, like it's on the home screen, a user sees it many, many times, instead of trying to download that every time the user opens the app, you might want to download that once and save it to the file manager. But of course, there are tons of images that are not going to be reused a ton of times. So like if you went on Instagram and you went to someone's profile, chances are most of the time you're not going to see that image that user posted that one time. So you wouldn't want to save everything to the file manager. It should be for things that the user is going to need or reuse multiple times. And again, as we learned, we can always use the catches directory or even the temp directory for stuff that is even more temporary. And if you're still confused, do not worry because I'm going to use this in the next couple videos so that we can get more comfortable working with the file manager and when we should actually use it. And in the next playlist, when we actually create a full app, we're going to use this efficiently. So you will get some hands-on experience on using the file manager. This unfortunately was a long video again, and I'm sorry for that. I'm going to try to make some shorter videos coming up, but this is just something that I think would be kind of hard to explain in detail without actually walking through all these steps. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for watching as always. I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.